Okay, now that we've had our little introduction to infectious disease, we want to take a look more specifically at different types of pathogens. And if you'll remember the answer to our question, what is a pathogen? Well, a pathogen was any organism that can cause a disease. And there are 5 pathogens. Please note in this picture only 4 are depicted, but there is a 5th pathogen that we'll talk about. And the 5 pathogens include virus, bacteria, protista, fungi, and parasites. Now, parasites is not listed in this picture, but we are going to cover parasites in a future slide. So let's go ahead and take each of these 5 pathogens individually and talk about them. So first we want to talk about the virus. Now, you can see in this picture that cute little virus looks so adorable, almost space-like, and harmless. However, viruses are very small. They're submicroscopic. You need very powerful electron microscopes in order to see them. So they're very, very small. They're smaller than bacteria. And boy, for being so small, they can sure cause a lot of damage. Now, they are also non-living. This is confusing for some people because they sure seem to be alive. How can something that's not living do so much damage and cause so much illness? But we have to define what life is. These are not cells. They do have DNA, but they are not cells. They do not have organelles like cells. They cannot divide on their own, and they cannot carry out any life processes that we learned about in previous units. They can do none of that, so they are not considered living. And they can only reproduce inside living things. They inject their DNA. They do have DNA. They inject it into another cell, a host cell, and that cell uses all of its cellular components to reproduce that DNA for the virus and create new virus particles. And then that cell bursts open and releases all this new virus. And when it bursts open to release that virus, that cell dies. And so it damages those cells and then goes on to infect new cells. Bacteria, they are unicellular. They're made up of, if you'll remember, unicellular means one cell. They're made up of one cell. And they directly cause damage to the cell. They don't use, they're different than viruses in that when they infect the body, they damage the cells themselves. They don't inject their DNA into the cell and hijack the cell. They do their own damage. And they can create a poison, which we call toxins. And those toxins are very dangerous to cells. And some examples include ear infections, food poisoning, tetanus, and strep throat. These are all infectious diseases that are caused by bacteria. And then we have the protists or protista. And they are also unicellular. They're made of only one cell, and they're bigger than bacteria. So we're kind of going in size here. Viruses were the smallest, and then there were bacteria, and now protists are a little bit bigger than bacteria. And they're diseases that are common in tropical areas, such as malaria, African sleeping sickness, and hiker's disease. And you can see in this picture some examples of protists. I believe this is the one that causes African sleeping sickness. Next, we want to talk about fungi. Now, fungi can be unicellular or multicellular. It can be made of just one cell, but it can also be made of many cells. And these fungi, they grow best in areas of the body that are warm and dark and moist. So this would be like on your feet. It usually infects skin. So on your feet, in folds and creases of your body, under your arms, in your hairline, where it's dark, warm and moist. So some examples would be athlete's foot, which is a fungal infection of the feet. And then also ringworm. Ringworm is a fungal infection on the skin. And lastly, we have parasites. And parasites, again, they can be either multicellular or unicellular. And they live on or inside another organism. And that other organism is called a host. And there they cause harm. And some examples would be scabies, ticks, fleas, and lice. Here in this picture we see, these are pictures of, I believe these are scabies. Either scabies or fleas. But those organisms that we named, they live on or under the skin, and they suck the blood from the host organism to get nourishment. And that causes a pretty uncomfortable situation. And for some hosts, it can be dangerous. Well, that's the end of our types of pathogens. And we're going to start talking about next, in our next video, about how our body deals with some of these pathogens.